All right, let's dive into one of the most wild and transformative periods in British history, the years between 1700 and 1900. Now, this wasn't just about steam engines and factories. The Industrial Revolution completely rewrote the rulebook on crime, and it forced a radical new way of thinking about punishment, too. So that brings us to the big question, right? How on earth did Britain go from a system of public hangings and justice based on pure fear to something we'd actually recognize today, with professional police and modern prisons? That's the huge journey we're going to tackle, and believe me, the answer is full of social chaos and some seriously game-changing ideas.
Okay, here's our game plan. We'll break it down into 4 key chunks. First, the explosion of new types of crime. Then, the birth of the very first modern police force. After that, the massive revolution in punishment. And finally, the bit you've been waiting for, how to take all this and lock in a grade 9. Let's do it.
So first up, we need to understand the problem. Think of 18th and 19th century Britain as a giant pressure cooker. You've got cities just exploding in size, people are pouring in from the countryside, completely cut off from their old communities, and you've got this insane new wealth right next to the most desperate poverty. This upheaval wasn't just creating stress, it was creating brand new, shiny opportunities for crime.
Now, before all this kicked off, the main way to keep people in line was just plain old fear. They called it the Bloody Code, and they weren't kidding. By 1800, there were over 200 crimes that could get you the death penalty. Or talking about things as minor as poaching. The whole idea was just to scare people into behaving. But as society was changing so fast, this brutal system just wasn't cutting it anymore.
And you can see that shift so clearly here. The old-school traditional crimes, like poaching, were suddenly being dwarfed by these massive new threats. You had highwaymen making a killing on the new roads that connected these booming cities. You had organized smuggling gangs that were operating on a scale that was basically industrial. The old system of, a part-time local constable, it was completely and totally out of its depth.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The very idea of what is a crime was suddenly up for debate. Just look at the Tolpuddle Martyrs. In 1834, these guys were just farm workers who got together to form a trade union, basically to ask for a decent wage. And for that, they were sentenced to transportation to Australia. The public outcry was massive. This case is a perfect example for your exam because it shows the massive social tensions of the time and how the law was being used to try and control this new working class.
Okay, so you've got all these new kinds of crime and an old system that just can't cope. A new solution was desperately needed, and that brings us to the first massive development, the idea of creating an organized professional police force.
Now, this didn't just appear out of nowhere. The seeds were planted back in the mid-1700s with the Fielding brothers and their Bow Street Runners. They were basically London's first professional thief-takers. But the real game changer, the moment everything shifted, was in 1829. That's when the Home Secretary, a guy named Robert Peel, set up the Metropolitan Police. A few decades later, that was followed up with the creation of the first proper detective force, the CID.
And the man behind this whole revolution was Robert Peel. You have to get this. His vision wasn't to create some kind of occupying army to control people. No, his idea was a force of citizens in uniform. His whole philosophy is captured in this famous quote, "The policing can only really work with the consent and help of the public." I mean, that was a totally radical idea for law enforcement back then. Okay, listen up. Crucial exam tip right here. Examiners do not want you to just list off what Peel did. No way. To get those top marks, you have to explain why his peelers or bobbies were such a massive deal. You need to explain that they were a preventative force. They were uniformed. They were professional. A huge, huge change from the old, reactive, and often pretty corrupt system of parish constables and night watchmen.
All right, on to our second big solution. So you've got this way more effective police force, and guess what? They're catching way more criminals. The next logical question became, what on earth do we do with them all? And this led to a really profound rethinking of the entire purpose of punishment.
So over this period, you see this gradual but massive shift. The Bloody Code starts getting taken apart piece by piece because people started to see it as just cruel and, frankly, ineffective. Sending people to Australia, transportation, was used as an alternative for a while, but that came to an end too. Public executions were stopped in 1868, mostly because they just turned into these rowdy, circus-like parties. And rising from the ashes of all that was this brand new idea, the prison. Not just as a place to lock people up, but as a machine designed for reform.
Now, this change in thinking didn't happen in a vacuum. It was pushed forward by some really influential reformers. You had John Howard, a total pioneer who went around the country inspecting prisons. His reports on the disease and corruption he found absolutely shocked the public. And then you had Elizabeth Fry, who worked tirelessly to make prisons more humane, pushing for things like education and real work for prisons, especially for women.
And the place where all these new theories were really put to the test was a brand new model prison, Pentonville, built in London in 1842. This place was designed from the ground up to be a literal machine for reforming criminals, all based on a controversial new theory called the separate system.
The theory behind it was pretty simple, really. If you keep prisoners in total isolation, they'll have no choice but to reflect on their sins, read the Bible, and come out a new person. And yeah, on paper, there were some good points. These new prisons were super clean, which stopped diseases from spreading. And it definitely stopped inmates from teaching each other how to be better criminals. But the reality? Oh, it was brutal. This extreme isolation led to widespread mental illness and incredibly high suicide rates. It was a harsh and ultimately a failed experiment.
Right, let's pull all of this together. Let's talk about the most important part. How do you take all these facts and turn them into a powerful analysis that's going to get you a top grade? First things first, these are the absolute non-negotiables. You have to remember the Industrial Revolution was the engine driving everything. You need to know that policing went from amateur to professional, all thanks to Peel. You need to know that punishment shifted from pure deterrence to the idea of reform. And you need to have your key names and examples locked and loaded. Peel, Howard, Fry, Pentonville, and the Tulpen Martyrs. Got it? Good. But here's the real secret sauce for hitting that grade 9. Don't just make a list of these changes. You have to connect them. It's all about connecting the dots. Explain how having a better police force led to a flood of new prisoners, which forced the government to build new prisons. Show how the ideas of reformers like Howard and Fry made the old brutal system seem completely unacceptable. Showing the examiner you see those links, that's everything.
Let me make this crystal clear for you. A good, solid grade 7 answer will accurately describe the changes. It'll say, Robert Peel created the police force. Fine. But a great grade 9 answer will explain why the police force was so desperately needed because of industrialization, and it will evaluate its long-term impact on the entire justice system. See the difference? It's the difference between what happened and why it mattered.
So, I'll leave you with this to chew on for your revision. Of these two massive, monumental changes, the creation of the professional police force and the invention of the modern prison, which one do you think truly changed Britain more? Being able to build an argument for one over the other? Now that is the key to unlocking a truly brilliant analysis.